this session today about teaching science in the early years is very much a quick guide to the sort of framework that guides the early years, some of the principles, but a lot of it is just going to be you sharing your ideas. So these may be things that if you've been teaching in early years, I'm hoping that you're going to post as many things as you can onto the chat for me. But also if you're the science subject leader, then you have probably visited early years or you've talked to colleagues in early years. So I'm sure you will also have things that you can share as well. So to start with, I thought I'd ask you first to just think and post your ideas about what is it that's different about teaching in the early years? How are the children different? How is the role of the adults different, and anything else that is different? So I want you very much just to share your thoughts on what is it that makes early years teaching different to teaching in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. Okay, thank you very much. So what's coming through strongly there is that there's a very much more of a focus on child-led learning and children coming up with their own ideas and just guiding their own learning. And the teacher is very much there, teacher or any other adults in the setting are very much there to facilitate the children as they explore and play and that sort of thing. There is a big focus on language development and also about getting the children ready to learn, particularly when we have children that have not been in particularly language rich environments at home or haven't developed the social skills that we would expect. So there's lots of other aspects of the children that we're trying to develop in that time. And to develop that talk and that language, a lot of it is the adults working alongside the children on the activities that they're choosing to do, that they're guiding for themselves, and a lot of that, or nearly all of it, will be sort of practical stuff. So there is a difference. I think teachers that teach in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 would like their learning to be much more child-led, but because we've got much more of a restrictive curriculum in Key Stage 1 and 2, there is much more content that needs to be delivered in a more specific way. So we tend to do more teaching when we get into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, whereas in early years, it's much more about facilitating that learning. I do apologise, that's my phone. Okay, so let's move on. I think the other thing is that I don't think it sort of came up on your chat there, but the children are quite different as far as their attention span is concerned. They will go from flitting from one thing to another to then very much spending really focused long periods of time in particularly on something that interests them. So they're also, the way that they learn, the way they respond is very different as well. So for people that are not familiar with it, the early years follow the framework, which has been around since 2017. And there's 4 guiding principles, overarching principles that guide the learning that goes on in the early years foundation stage. So I will just put them up there for you to read. So every child is capable of learning. I think we all know that, but it's good to remind ourselves. And that's the key thing there. It's these positive relationships with each other and also with adults. And that's why early years settings have a key worker who really gets to know the children. So again, that point there is talking about, it's those relationships between people that is so important to be able to really support the children with their learning. And then also recognizing that children do learn in different ways. They have different, some strategies will work better with one child or another, and they also learn at different rates. So there isn't a set agenda that we've got to get through by the end of this week, by the end of this term. It's much more guided by what the pupils need next. And that's where having those relationships where you really start to know the pupils, understand the pupils, and see what their next needs are. So the different ways that children learn comes under these effective teaching and learning, the characteristics of effective teaching and learning. And playing and exploring, and that's some words that came up in the chat. Children spend time just playing and exploring, having a go at things. Something will go wrong, they'll try something different, they'll have another go, they'll do something, you know, they'll just keep going back to it. And it's giving them the time, giving them something engaging that they can then take on and explore. Active learning, and that was practical. Martina said there are lots of practical activities. So they're always doing, they're doing. And the idea is that because they're doing things that they're choosing to do, that will help them to develop their concentration, but also their resilience and their determination. So when things don't go wrong, they keep going until they succeed. And then that will also drive their enjoyment as well. And then finally, we have the sort of critical thinking and creative thinking. So that again needs to be supported and developed by working alongside adults. And again, those three characteristics of effective learning are things that in an ideal world we would be carrying on into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. It's just we don't seem to have the time. So down in early years, it's that real opportunity to really give the children time to explore for themselves. So alongside the characteristics of effective learning, there's also these 7 areas of learning and development. And 3 of them are the prime areas. So these are the really crucial ones, communication and language. And again, that came up on the chat there as being something that we need to be providing a really language-rich environment for the children. Physical development is also important. Obviously, that becomes PE later through the school, but it's physical development in so many different ways, the small and large motor skills. And then the personal, social, and emotional development. So that's making bonds with teachers, with other adults, and also with one another, and all those social skills as well. So their resilience and that sort of thing. So those 3 prime areas of learning, we need to get, those need to be in place before they're able to access the learning that's going to happen later in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And also they are strengthened, they're applied in these 4 specific areas of literacy, mathematics, and you can see the words starting to sound familiar if you're Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2 teacher. And then we have understanding the world, and that's where science fits, and expressive arts and design. So now you can start to see where this is leading into the Key Stage 1 curriculum, but we're not teaching it in the Key Stage 1 curriculum style. And within the understanding the world, that's the statement. Just let you read that. And there's 2 science words that jump out at you there, explore and observe. So you can see where the science is starting to come in now. And then if you actually read the statement about the world, which is where the science fits specifically. So now you can clearly see that we can see where the Key Stage 1 curriculum comes from. We've got materials there, we've got plants, we've got animals, and we've got observations about how things, objects move in relation to each other, similarities and differences and that sort of thing. So you can see where the Key Stage 1 curriculum emerges. So we've got the 2 documents, we've got the foundation stage framework, and then we've got the national curriculum for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And we've got those characteristics of effective learning, which for me, they later turn into the working scientifically skills. So it's the way we go about our learning. It's the way that we go about our science learning in Key Stage 1 and 2. and then the understanding of the world becomes the knowledge content within the primary curriculum, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. Just so that you're aware, there is a revised framework that's due to be introduced in September 21. The plan was that it would be possible to introduce it by September 2020. Who knows whether that is likely to be the case or not. The consultation has happened, but there's no new framework as yet. Okay, so what I'd like to think about now is and share your ideas, because you can see that the science is in there, it's in the curriculum, but would the children in the early years know they're being scientists? Probably not. So I'm wondering and would like you to think about, how can we help the children to behave like scientists? And how can we help them know that that's what they're doing? And yes, Lindsay, you're right. There is a big gap. There is a big crossover between early years and Key Stage 1 curriculum. But the thing is, I think what we have to recognise in the early years is about providing as many experiences as possible. So it's going to cover a broad range, and they may well be providing experiences such as playing with parachutes, mixing things with water, which actually are going to come much later in Key Stage 2. But what they're doing is providing them those experiences so that then later when they come to Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, they can go back and explore them in a more systematic way. So like with the seasonal change, yes, of course, we'll be doing all of that in early years, and they will do it again in Key Stage 1. But it will be done in a more systematic way. They'll be able to look at the observations and how they've changed over time. I'm going to stop talking and let you post your ideas on how to support children to behave like scientists and how to make them aware that that's what they're doing. Okay, do keep typing if you are, that's great. But it was interesting, the first two comments were about the I wonder, and getting the children to, or supporting the children to come up with those I wonder statements. And that's something that we were discussing last week. And last week I showed you the question wonder from the Great Science Share. And that is really a key important part of teaching in the early years. And when I say teaching, I mean facilitating learning, where we're modeling and working alongside them, encouraging them to ask questions and then supporting them to answer them in different ways. In the role play corner, that's a really useful way where you can have the role play corner set up. Sometimes it might be a vet's area, it might be a doctor's, it might be a lab, it might be a fire station, it might be all sorts of things. And where the children, you might sort of go, oh, you know, if you're a scientist, what would you be doing? What equipment are you using? How would a scientist record it? And I think just using that word scientist on occasion just helps them to realize that that's what they're doing. So as soon as they're measuring something or using a magnifying glass, then we can talk about them being scientists. So also a range of resources, and we're going to come and talk about some of the continuous play resources, sort of the construction, sand and water, that sort of thing in a moment. And also those specific sciencey things. So the magnifying glasses, binoculars, magnets, torches. And the nice thing about early years is that they can be freely available. So some of those resources the children will just be going and helping themselves to. And again, that's really scientific. If you see them looking and peering at something, you can just say, why don't you go and get the resources from the science area that you need? What resource do you need? What will help you look more closely? So lots of things that we can do to help them behave like scientists and help them to recognize that that's what they're doing. Okay, so we'll move on to talk about the continuous provision. So within the early years setting, there will be a number of areas that are continuously there, hence being called continuous provision. Most of these will be available inside and outside, so that any learning that takes place inside can also take place outside. So you tend to get sort of smaller provision inside, and then where things need more space, outside. So the children are developing both their small and large motor skills. And what I'd like you to think about, you've probably all seen these areas set up in your early years setting. And the thing is that we can't just leave them. We can't just leave the water tray as a water tray for 35 weeks of the year. We need to do some interesting things with it. We need to change it. We need to adapt it. We need to make it continuously different. So I'd just like you to post your ideas about how you've changed some of these areas. What else have you added to it? What else, how have you adapted it? Do continue posting if you're still typing. I recognize that you've probably got quite a lot to post, so it's not quite as quick, but I will just talk and we'll respond to things as they come. So the water is an obvious thing, the water and the sand, but the water in particularly, just adding different things. So adding glitter, you can add things like jelly bath, which make it go into sort of a gloopy slush puppy type thing, and then you add another liquid in and it all disappears again into water. Putting ice cubes in it, so freezing things. Using lots of different equipment for them to be moving water around. So you can have large things like guttering, which was mentioned, but then also small things like pipettes and syringes. So they're starting to use their sort of fine motor skills. Putting things in sand so you can bury things, you can have magnets, you can see which things can come out with a magnet, which ones can't. Can they fish with magnets in the water and see what will come out? All sorts of things like that. With the malleable area, you can put a range of different things in. So you can put sort of cooked and dried pasta, so they can feel the difference between those. Different types of pasta, so they can be looking at those. All sorts of different things. There is no right or wrong about what you put in these things. And sometimes you can almost just put a random object in and see what happens. And the children will find interesting things to do with all sorts of things that you just don't even know what they are sometimes. They will find interesting things to do. And oh, thank you, Lauren. I think you might have just moved me a nice segue into my next section, which is about linking things to text. So obviously where we get to our role play or our creative and our small world, that will often be linked to a story perhaps that is being sort of become sort of like the thing of the week or something like that, or over a longer period. So using stories. So there's a range of really good, I mean, there is so many stories out there. I'm not even going to attempt to share all of them, but I just wanted to sort of highlight, you know, there are a range of stories that you can be using to teach about plants and growing plants, that sort of thing. Can't You Sleep, Little Bear is a nice one if you want to talk about different light sources. So it's a more of a sort of physicsy type of thing, although we're not interested in biology, physics and chemistry at this stage, but later on they will study light. Three Little Pigs is a very standard one that's used for thinking about materials and their properties. And then we've got something like books like the Gruffalo, where we've got different animals in there. And that's one of my particular favorites for introducing food chains, but getting for the children to start thinking about where animals live and what they eat and that sort of thing. And who do they run away from? Who do they want to chase? So using stories is a really nice way of engaging children. And as you've mentioned, Lauren, about thinking about how you can adapt your continuous provision to match those stories. And there are a number of benefits of using stories, which is why stories are used going into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 as well. It provides a context for the children to ask those questions and to explore and solve problems. Often there may well be a problem that one of the characters has, and then the children can think about how they would solve the problem for that character. Are there different ways that the character could solve that problem? One that's I've been doing recently as part of some other early years training is about how could the gingerbread man get across the river? And again, that's a very standard activity that's done within early years settings. The other thing that is that it puts the science that they're doing, although we're not calling it science necessarily, it puts it all into a familiar context. That familiar context being a familiar story that they know. Which later on will start to help them make those links between the science and the real world, which is all about developing their science capital when we get into Key Stage 1, 2, and 3. So those are the advantages for the science of linking it to stories. But then also, let's think about the advantages for their language. It means that they're going back and revisiting those stories, and they'll probably retell those stories themselves. They may, because they've solved the challenge in a different way, they may retell it in a slightly different way. So all that will be enhancing their language skills as well. So there's a real sort of benefit to both science and English by using stories as a starting point for the science. So I just like you again just to throw your favorite ideas, maybe rather than doing a big long list, type one name, then type and post that, and then type another one so that we can see them all popping in. So what stories do you know, either that your favorite ones if you've been teaching in early years for a long time, or if you know that your teachers in early years use particular stories that are really popular? Do keep typing as I'm talking, and what we'll do is we'll collate these and add them to the slides for if anybody wants them later, so that you've got all these suggestions. But what you can see there is we've got a good range of different books, some of which I have to be honest I don't know, but there's a lot of sort of animal books, Dear Zoo, Brown Bear, all these Billy Goat's Gruff. So there's a lot of those. Traditional tales are also very useful. So Gingerbread Man, Billy Goat Gruff, Three Little Pigs, that sort of thing. Lots of animal books there. And then there's certain authors that come up again and again as well. And materials books, plants books, a whole range of things going on there, which is absolutely fantastic. So we'll collate those for you. Do please keep typing. But what you can see is that it's very easy to have a selection of books around a theme. So here's just a range of books about a space theme. And here are a range of books about basically summertime holidays and that sort of thing. So what will often happen is that there may be a book that's being focused on, but then actually there's a longer theme over a period of time. So what I'd like you to just now have a think about and share are what some of your favorite themes are. So I've just mentioned there, space seems to be one that crops up whenever I go to early years settings. They'll probably have had a space theme at some point. And then also summer. So obviously those seasonal ones come up. Okay, thank you. So you can see there's superheroes comes up quite a few times. Pirates is featured a few times, dinosaurs. There are some very sort of standard ones that basically children are just interested in these things. And that's the most important thing about teaching in early years. It's trying to work out and get to know the children well enough that you know what is going to spark their curiosity, what's going to engage them. And it will be different for different children. So not everybody is going to find everything is quite as engaging. But over the course of the year, with careful planning, all the children hopefully have had something that really suited them. And then lots of children will have had many things that suit them. And things can be tweaked and adapted for them. And that's why teaching in early years can be so exciting, because you don't necessarily know what your next topic is going to be, because it may just be that somebody brings something in, or there's a program on television that a lot of them have watched, and suddenly it's almost like that has to be your next topic, because everybody's just suddenly really engaged in that. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can go with that, go with the flow, go with their excitements. So just one idea that one teacher has used, and it's cropped up, the number of teachers do it in different ways, but the way that this teacher introduced a topic was by using these Dig Deep discovery boxes. So she would put lots and lots of resources and books and all that sort of thing to do with a particular topic. So if you just look at that, you can see what topic or what theme they're going to be going into. And the idea is is that it was just put there, and then the children explore it for themselves. So it's just left. There's no adult intervention. The children are just left to explore it. And then, of course, they'll start thinking about what can they do with it. And then that will lead on into the future learning. And the teacher said that the most difficult thing was not engaging with them when they first opened the box, and really giving them the time to explore and think about what they want to do with their resources. I don't know whether any of you have got a similar sort of thing. People before were talking about it as like curiosity boxes, things like that, where you just put a range of things in the box and get the children to explore. Okay, so I do believe this is my last little pointer, is the resourcing. Obviously resources tend to have be bought by the early years. They tend to have their own separate budget. So subject leaders, science subject leaders may not be so aware of what's going on, but there are some real crossovers between what the early years would have and what would be useful in other areas of the school as well. And what I've got here is just a list of some of the things that, this is just one teacher's idea of things that she sort of felt you had to have, she really couldn't do without. And then some other things that she sort of felt, oh, it'd be nice if we could have these things. So what I'd like you to just explore, and thank you, Lindsay, yes, everything's in that discovery area, in your investigation area. So what are those things that you would have in your investigation area? What are other things that perhaps come out linked to particular topics? What would be your must-haves or your really nice to haves? Particularly anything that's sort of not already on the list, perhaps, but please do reinforce your must-haves from that list as well. Please do keep typing. Lindsay, I love the fact that you've managed to get your light box, and others can borrow it. And I think that's often the way. At one point, a long time ago now, but all schools were sent a digital microscope. And whilst it was sort of sent to the subject leader, sorry, subject leaders, I'm just going to give you a bashing for the moment. No, I'm joking. Because like if you get sent one digital microscope, you've only got one thing, and it goes into the science cupboard and people forget it's there. And I would go into schools and go, do you remember it was given it? And it'd been in the back of the cupboard and nobody had actually used it for about 3 years. And I said, well, why don't you just put it down into the early years? And of course, it's there now all the time. And so it's being used a lot. But then, of course, you can be nice and loan it to the rest of the school. So I think that's really, really important. It's really nice that you've got that attitude. You know, and occasionally infants in Key Stage 1 may have, Key Stage 2 may have something you want as well. Those recyclable materials, I don't know in other areas, but round here there's something you can belong to called the scrap project, and that's really good. You sort of have a membership for a school small fee, and then you can go and literally just take what other people are throwing out, and that can be a really good source of all sorts of unusual materials, as well as lots of paper and all sorts of things like that as well. So thank you very much for that. That is the end of our session. Time has gone very quickly. we will finish there. Obviously, do feel free to post anything else. But thank you very much for joining us and sharing all your wonderful ideas about early years teaching and learning. And goodbye.